Nikola Tesla was already famous, the scientist whose experiments with electricity were destined to transform daily life in the 20th century. He dreamed of harnessing the wind and the sun to make free energy available for everyone.
Nikola Tesla died on January 7, 1943, in room 3327 of the New Yorker Hotel. He was 86 years old, alone, and by most accounts nearly broke. This part is real. He was the man who gave the world alternating current, who built the first hydroelectric plant at Niagara Falls, who held hundreds of patents across a dozen countries, and he ended his life feeding pigeons from a hotel window, unable to pay what he owed. Within hours of his death, agents from the U.S. Office of Alien Property arrived at the hotel, sealed his room, and confiscated his papers. National security, they said. It was wartime. Nobody asked many questions. That much happened. Everything from here is a story, one built in the space the history books leave empty. In the final years, when Tesla stopped granting interviews, stopped taking visitors, and began speaking only to a small, careful circle of people he trusted. What follows imagines what might have been sitting in that silence. The hotel room the government seized was Tesla's residence. It was not, in this story, where his real work happened. In his last decade, Tesla had grown obsessively private. He believed, rightly or not, that he was being watched, that his ideas were being stolen, that the wrong people were circling closer to what he understood about energy and how it moved through the world. So he split his life in two. The public Tesla lived in a modest hotel room and talked to almost no one. The private Tesla, in this telling, kept a second space, one that existed on no public record, built quietly, funded from whatever scraps of money and goodwill he had left. That space sat forgotten for 80 years beneath a university building, 2 floors below a courtyard where students crossed every morning without a clue what was under their feet. The man who finds it in this story is Dr. Aaron Whitmore, a materials engineer, the kind of researcher whose whole career is built on paying attention to the things other people scroll past. He studies how early 20th century alloys behave under decades of electromagnetic stress, which is about as unglamorous as academic work gets, right up until it isn't. Whitmore finds the first thread by accident, buried in a stack of declassified property records he's reviewing for an entirely different project. Not classified files, not government archives, old maintenance logs, property transfer paperwork. The kind of institutional paper trail that nobody destroys and nobody reads. One line, dated 1947, stops him. He starts pulling threads. Months of digging turn up a building's full ownership history, and buried in it, invoices for copper shielding installed in a basement, far beyond anything the structure would ever need. Electrical capacitors, custom ordered in 1941, delivered to a subchamber that appears on no floor plan anyone can locate. And finally, a building permit from 1938, authorizing basement modifications under a single signature in Tesla. It takes Whitmore 6 more months to get anywhere near that basement. Universities do not open sealed levels quickly. There are safety inspections, insurance assessments, facilities office meetings where someone keeps asking whether this is really worth the cost and disruption. Whitmore fights through all of it, inch by inch, the way people do when they've decided something matters more than their own convenience. In early 2024, in this story, his team finally goes down. The corridor is dry, dusty, but structurally sound, no flooding, no collapse, nothing that looks like 80 years of neglect. The stone and poured concrete did exactly what they were built to do. Kept the temperature stable, the moisture out, the world above from ever reaching down. At the end of the hall is a door that doesn't belong to its era, reinforced, custom-fitted, locked with a mechanism that has no commercial equivalent from the period. This door wasn't bought. It was designed specifically for this room. It takes a locksmith 2 full hours to open it. When it finally swings free, the air that comes out is stale, but strangely undisturbed. No mildew, no decay, no smell of 80 years of rot. Just stillness, held in place by isolation and stone. The room is about 20 feet across. Every wall is lined edge to edge, floor to ceiling, in copper sheeting. And at the center of it, catching the sweep of flashlights, stands a machine. It matches nothing in Tesla's known, published patents. Roughly 6 feet tall, 4 feet across, built from concentric copper rings set at angles so deliberate that Whitmore later calls the design almost architectural, nested, geometric. Obviously the product of someone who had worked out every measurement in his head 1,000 times before ever touching the copper. Hundreds of individual coils, hand-wound with an almost unsettling consistency. A resonance coil at the base. At the top, a ceramic spire, angled upward like a conductor's baton caught mid-gesture. 80 years of oxidation have turned the copper a deep green-brown, but nothing is broken. Not one coil has slipped. Not one ring is warped. Whatever alloy this is, it has simply refused to age the way it should have. Along the metal shelves lining the chamber, arranged with the same obsessive precision as the machine itself, are Tesla's notes. Not the kind that end up in an archive somewhere with a catalog number, but working notebooks. Loose sheets. Equations crowded in tight, hurried handwriting, sketches bleeding into diagrams, and passages that drift, page by page, from pure engineering into something closer to a warning left for whoever might eventually find them. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a historian of science who joins the team in week 2, spends hours on her knees photographing every page before anyone touches anything. She reads slowly, carefully, the way you read something you suspect you'll never see again. Near the back of the third notebook, she stops. She reads it 3 times before she says anything. Later, she'll say it wasn't the science that stopped her. It was the tense. Not will be free. Not could be. Free. Present tense. As if he already knew it worked. It's Marcus Chen, the youngest member of the team, who finds the detail that changes everything. A graduate student in electrical engineering, assigned the unglamorous job of documenting the chamber's physical infrastructure before anyone starts handling the equipment. He's crouched near the base of the machine, tracing a run of copper tubing along the wall with a flashlight. He stops moving. He looks at the tubing. He looks at where it disappears into the wall. He stands up slowly and tells Whitmore, quietly, that this thing is still wired. Not with anything modern. Period-appropriate copper tubing, installed sometime around 1941, running through the chamber walls and into the building's own electrical infrastructure. It takes Chen a full day to trace the whole path. The tubing connects to a bank of capacitors installed in a separate alcove of the basement, corroded, brittle, but intact at the terminals, and from there, improbably, all the way to the building's main electrical panel. For 80 years, without anyone knowing it, this chamber has technically remained live. There's a version of this moment where the team does the responsible thing, documents the wiring, files a report, calls the safety office before anyone lays a hand on anything. That's the correct call by every professional and ethical standard there is. But there's a very particular kind of pressure that builds when you're standing in front of the unfinished last work of the greatest electrical engineer who ever lived, and it's still somehow connected to power, and you're being asked to simply write it down and walk away. On March 14, 2024, in this story, they don't walk away. Whitmore finds the building's original electrical panel on the east wall, old, thick with dust, fitted with manual switches nobody has touched since the 1940s. Most of the handwritten labels have faded past legibility. One hasn't. Vasquez recognizes the handwriting instantly. 3 words, still sharp after 80 years. Whitmore will later call what happens next a moment of scientific weakness. Everyone in the room understands, at least intellectually, what it means to flip power into an 80-year-old device of unknown capability, built by a man who spent the last useful years of his life trying to move electricity through the earth itself. They are trained professionals at a serious institution, standing next to an explicit written warning from the machine's own creator. At 2:47 p.m., Whitmore flips the switch anyway. 3 seconds of nothing. Then the chamber begins to hum, low at first, the kind of frequency you feel in your chest before you register it as sound. Over the next 20 seconds it builds, and the copper coils begin to glow, a faint, steady blue-green, with none of the arcing or sparking anyone would expect from 70-year-old wiring under sudden load. Then the building's modern alarm systems trip. Sensors installed decades after this room was sealed are picking up a massive electromagnetic field, radiating outward from the subbasement, growing at an exponential rate. Not a power surge, not an overload. A field, actively expanding. Whitmore runs for the panel and kills the external power. The hum doesn't stop. What he doesn't fully understand until later is that the machine has done exactly what Tesla's notes suggest he anticipated, achieved resonance. The old, degraded capacitors have held just enough residual charge to trigger a feedback loop inside the coil system. The device is now sustaining its own electromagnetic field, a closed loop, no external input required, stable on its own terms. For nearly 30 seconds, While the building's emergency response team scrambles to locate the master disconnect for the entire basement level, Tesla's machine runs on nothing but itself. Then, slowly, the hum fades. The glow dims. Silence returns to the chamber. Somewhere above them, an evacuation order is already being called over the building's PA system. Response teams arrive within hours in this telling. Field detectors, spectrum analyzers, people trying to get clean measurements out of 90 seconds of chaos. What they find is a field strength beyond anything documented for a localized, non-ionizing source. Two separate technicians recalibrate their own instruments before they're willing to accept the readings as real. But the strength isn't the strange part. The frequency is. The device operated at exactly 7.83 hertz, and here's where the story reaches for something that's actually true. The Earth's own electromagnetic field genuinely does oscillate at approximately 7.83 hertz, a phenomenon called the Schumann resonance, named for physicist Winfried Otto Schumann, who calculated it mathematically in 1952, 9 years after Tesla died. It's produced by the interaction between the Earth's surface and the ionosphere, and it circles the globe continuously. There's even real research suggesting human brainwave activity during deep sleep tends to hover near that same frequency. In the story, Tesla knew about this decades before Schumann put numbers to it, not by that name, but through his own experimental instincts, understanding that the Earth itself behaves like a resonant cavity, and that if you could excite it at the right frequency, it would carry energy with it. The machine's copper spacing, coil diameters, and wire resistance all line up, in this telling, with a precision that only makes sense if he was building toward this exact number the entire time. Not a transmitter reaching outward toward a receiver, but something closer to a tuning fork, designed to make the planet itself carry the signal. This is worth pausing on. Honestly, the Schumann resonance is real physics, well documented and easy to verify. Everything about a machine tuned to exploit it for unlimited free energy is invented. That's the hinge the whole story turns on, a true, slightly eerie fact, welded onto a fictional device to make the fiction feel load-bearing. The emotional center of the story leans on things that are genuinely part of Tesla's biography. He really did dream, publicly, seriously, at real financial cost, of transmitting power wirelessly around the globe. His Wardenclyffe Tower project, funded initially by J.P. Morgan, was a real, earlier, larger attempt at exactly this. When Morgan reportedly grasped what Tesla was actually proposing, a system where anyone, anywhere, could draw power without paying for it, his response, as it's usually quoted, was blunt. If anyone can draw power from the air, where do I put the meter? Funding collapsed. Wardenclyffe was never finished, and the tower itself was eventually demolished for scrap. Tesla never recovered financially, and he spent his final years increasingly isolated, chased by real debt and a scientific establishment that had largely written him off as an eccentric relic. The fictional turn this script takes is imagining that Tesla didn't actually stop after Wardenclyffe. That quietly, without seeking funding or publicity, he kept working, refining the theory, solving what remained of the engineering, and eventually finishing, alone, in secret, what he'd failed to finish in public. And then, understanding exactly what he'd built and exactly what era he was living in, he made a deliberate choice not to release it. It was 1943. He'd spent years watching authoritarian governments demonstrate, in the most explicit terms imaginable, their willingness to weaponize any available technology against entire civilian populations. In the story, Tesla understood something uncomfortable. The same system that could deliver free energy to every person on Earth could just as easily become the most total instrument of control ever built. A government running a global wireless power network wouldn't need to bomb infrastructure or cut cables. It could simply decide silently who got power and who didn't. No visible mechanism, no way to fight back, just darkness delivered to whoever the operator chose to punish. So, in this telling, he didn't hand it to anyone. He didn't destroy it either. He sealed it, wired it, wrote his warning on the switch by hand, and went back to a hotel room to wait out the rest of his life. Not because he'd failed. Because he'd succeeded completely and understood, better than the people around him, exactly how dangerous that success could be in the wrong hands. Within weeks of the fictional activation, Tesla's recovered notebooks are fully digitized. The university in the story issues a carefully worded statement about an unexpected electromagnetic phenomenon and commits to further study under proper safety protocols. The chamber stays sealed. Then the requests start arriving. The Department of Energy asks for complete data from the activation. DARPA does the same. Other inquiries show up in internal communication logs without ever being formally acknowledged. The kind of detail that, in a story like this, is doing a lot of quiet work to make readers feel like something bigger is happening just out of frame, even though nothing in that sentence is actually verifiable or in reality true. The scientific community in the narrative splits cleanly down the middle. One camp focuses on safety. Sustained exposure to electromagnetic fields at the intensity this device produced could have real biological effects, and there's no existing ethical framework for studying something like it responsibly. They want to slow everything down, build the framework first, and go back to the chamber later, carefully. The other camp can't slow down. If Tesla really solved global wireless power transmission in 1941, then decades of theoretical walls that modern electromagnetic engineers have been quietly battering against for years were never actually walls. They were solved problems, sitting untouched in a basement, waiting to be rediscovered. This camp wants to build a second device immediately, under controlled conditions, using Tesla's own specifications. Whitmore faces a formal university review, not for finding the chamber, but for activating a live, unknown device without completing a safety assessment first. He doesn't fight it. In a later interview, in the story, he doesn't try to justify what he did as procedurally sound. He just says Tesla left it wired and waiting. He built it to be found and turned on. We were just the ones who found it first. As the story closes, the machine hasn't been activated again. It sits in the chamber exactly as it did for 80 years before Whitmore's team found it. Dormant, patient, the copper rings wound exactly as Tesla left them, the warning still legible on the switch. Researchers keep working through the notebooks, finding equations that in places outpace the theoretical frameworks currently used in electromagnetic engineering, at least according to the story's own internal logic. The argument over whether to build a second device, and who gets to be in the room if they do, is still unresolved. Nobody outside a small circle has made a public decision about what happens next. That's really the emotional hook this kind of story is built on, not the machine itself, but the unanswered question sitting behind it. Tesla, in this telling, never doubted that his invention would work. What he doubted, what the story frames as the real unresolved question, was whether the people who eventually found it would be ready for what it meant. Free energy for billions of people is one version of what a system like this could be. A silent, untraceable kill switch for anyone's electricity is the other. Same machine. Same 7.83 Hz. Same copper rings. The only difference is who's holding the switch. If you're using this for a video, I genuinely encourage framing it clearly as a dramatized or speculative story rather than a factual account, the same way a well-made historical drama doesn't claim to be a documentary. The real anchor points here are worth being proud of on their own: Tesla's actual, well-documented death in poverty and isolation, the real seizure of his papers by the Office of Alien Property, his real and serious ambitions around wireless power transmission, the real collapse of Wardenclyffe, and the real, verifiable physics of the Schumann resonance. Everything involving a sealed 2024 discovery, a live activation, government agencies scrambling for data, and a machine that actually achieves free global energy transmission is invented, written in the same voice and rhythm as the reference script you sent me, but original content, not a retelling of it. I'm glad to keep building this out further, a longer version, a tighter YouTube cut version, a version anchored more heavily in verified Tesla history, with the speculative elements pushed further into what-if territory, or even a sequel picking up from The Machine is Still Down There. Just say which direction you want to take it.